So with that being said, in this video there's going to be a lot of trigger warnings. It's just going to be formatted a little bit differently just because I know that this entire thing is going to be some hard to swallow pills. But if you think that you could get through it because you might feel like this relates to you, then I promise it won't be that much of a letdown. But with that being said, let's get into this god-awful. Okay, so with the first thing to be said, you may not actually have depression. Now, before you get it mixed up, I'm not saying that depression doesn't exist. It obviously does. I just think that from the misinformation that we get nowadays on what depression is and how we diagnose ourselves with it, we just kind of jump to the conclusion that depression is, that everything means that we have depression, and that's not to classify the people who wear depression like a badge of honor because they don't know what it is or they self-diagnose themselves. I'm talking about the people who kind of feel like they don't know what's going on and they're not sure if they're depressed, and they really feel like they're depressed, but they want to feel better and they're not, just kind of being these keyboard warriors on the internet. If you feel like this more applies to you, then I'm kind of going to get into some explanations on why it might not actually be depression. Because the first flaw that I think that we could find is how we're kind of taught the difference between depression and sadness is. We're made to think that if you're sad, it should only last for an hour or two, if at the very least a day, and that anything longer than that is kind of depression. And I don't think, and that's obviously kind of not the case. Being sadness could be anywhere from you're sad for an entire day to a week, and even for a while. And the biggest misclassification that people get is, I want to kill myself. But just because you want to kill yourself, I don't think that it directly means that you have depression. So what I mean by that is that there's a lot of other symptoms that kind of go into having depression, and a lot of people just kind of say that they want to kill themselves. And the difference that it is, for example, if I'm really tired and I don't have the energy to kind of be motivated or to want to do a lot of the stuff that I'd occasionally be willing to do, the thing that I might say, be compelled to say, even if I believe it at the time, is I want to kill myself. And obviously I probably don't mean it, although I feel like I do. But if someone were to actually kind of take it to the extreme of, okay, well, you said it, I obviously wouldn't go through that action with it. And the reason why I say, oh, it might just be because you're tired, is kind of because it goes to, for the people who kind of have, who's ever been to a sleepover or spending the night, whichever you want to call it, and you make all these plans to stay up all night and you kind of make all these plans to stay up all night and to have the craziest party ever, and you're one of the people who ends up kind of falling asleep straight away, or it doesn't happen. One of the feelings that'll kind of best be the explanation for this is when you know subconsciously that you need to be doing stuff to stay awake, but you convince yourself, and maybe the people around you, that as long as you just close your eyes even for a little bit, then it'll kind of help you stay awake because the stress is on your eyes, and even though you know subconsciously that that's the worst idea to do, it's the best one that you come to terms with, and then of course you end up falling asleep. And although despite the next day you waking up and someone saying, we're gonna go walk around, or we're gonna do this, or we're gonna do that, and it's sounding like a good idea in your head, but you just don't know why, and you kind of feel a little bit like, oh man, that sucks, on why you weren't just able to keep yourself up at night. I feel like that's a big factor with it, because relating to it, obviously to the more extreme point, is when you watch those videos and you see someone get a concussion, or they're freezing to death, and someone's like, oh, just stay awake, you'll live through it if you stay awake. And you convince yourself that if you're in that situation and all you had to do is stay awake, that you would do it because you'd be able to, you would just get up and you'd be able to move around, or you'd just do anything, and you don't understand why they don't have that level of, that same level of effort or motivation that you would have if all you had to do is stay awake. But it does kind of relate to that, and I know it's under different circumstances, but really it is the same thing, where if you put yourself in that situation at the sleepover, and you know that all you have to do is maybe get up and walk around, or all you have to do is just not fall asleep, but you end up doing it anyway because you're so tired that you just kind of give up. I feel like that's the same thing, and I kind of feel like that in that moment when we decide like, and I can't do it anymore, it is that same thing that kind of relates to the whole, oh, I want to kill myself. Because what it is, and again, for the demographic that does end up kind of having depression a lot, it's the same demographic that stays up for really late hours into the night, and it's the same type of people who kind of are expected to put a lot of just work and no emotion into the things that they do. It's expected of them when they go to school, and it's expected of them in the workplace, and it's just expected to leave any personal issues at home. And then when you do get a lot of when you are bombarded with a lot of work, and there's really no excuse to not be able to do it, because the only excuse is a personal excuse, but personal excuses have to stay home, and not to justify that it's only homework that's keeping people up late. It is just a lot of things, and I feel like that eventually that lack of energy just builds up to the fact where you don't really have a lot of motivation. And not to say that in the extremist case it's where your body just kind of gives up, but I feel like you're in that same kind of that mental state where you're just like, fuck it, I want to die, or I want to kill myself. But I don't think that that's the same thing as depression, because a lot of things that people kind of misconstrue is, again, I want to commit suicide, so I obviously have depression. But it's not that easy, and a lot of people, again, just kind of self-diagnose themselves because whatever fits their agenda or makes them look cool on the internet and relatable. Because the thing is, when a lot of people kind of complain about their depression on the internet, or when they kind of post about it, it's always the same thing, and it's kind of how you know that people are self-diagnosing. But when they're like, nobody understands, it's when you're sad all the time, and there's just a couple moments of happiness, and they only last for a little bit, but then you go right back to being sad. And it's like, well, that's clearly not depression, because depression isn't defined by being happy a lot and then going back to being sad. Depression, it is kind of hard to get your spirits lifted up. For example, if, maybe you have this favorite thing to do, playing basketball, I don't know. And usually playing basketball makes you happy, and people invite you to start playing basketball, and you just start declining because you don't think that basketball is going to do it for you, or you're just genuinely not interested. That's the difference. When you have this thing, whatever it may be, that genuinely always made you happy or brings a smile to your face, and then all of a sudden you decide that that's not something you want to do or have interest anymore, because it's not really kind of filling the hole that it usually would have filled. That's the difference between clearly having depression, because it's hard to lift your spirits up. It's hard to find a lot of motivation anymore in the things that you otherwise would, versus just being a little bit bummed out and then going and having fun and being able to smile really easily because there's a lot of things that still make you happy, and then going back to being sad. And it's just something that we mislabel a lot, and a huge difference. Another thing is not just wanting to be suicidal, but it's a lot of other things, like maybe a lack of eating, where you wouldn't be, if you're not happy and you really don't feel like it, you're not able to eat. And that's could put into a lot of other things too. But it's just, again, wanting to kill yourself, not really having a lot of motivation in the things that you otherwise would, not being able to eat, not being able to sleep, which I know would just kind of come back. But again, I'm not trying to say that being sad isn't a gateway to depression, but they still are different things. And it's the difference between staying up late because you want to or you have to, and in terms of there's other things to do, and you genuinely needing and wanting to go to sleep because you feel tired, versus wanting to go to sleep and not being able to because you just genuinely, you could close your eyes and lay there and your body just won't let you. It's another form of anxiety, but that's still just another branch of depression. But with all these, it's just all these other things that kind of add on, and the difference, and why I think that it needs to be addressed, and what the differences are. Because basically the concept that I'm trying to get along here is not know the difference and stop self-diagnosing, but it's more like it would be easier for you as an individual to know which one you have, and to not really kind of misdiagnose yourself, because the difference between depression is people who are depressed, again, because it's not as easy to get them motivated or excited or happy about anything. To them, it's really this never-ending void. It's something that's really serious, and they should be getting help for, because if you feel and you believe that you have depression, you kind of have this empty. For the people who just genuinely need help and they're convinced that they have depression, what they see is there's kind of this void that they can't walk out of, because they're so convinced that being depressed means that they're going to want to kill themselves at some point, or they just end up being fear-mongered, or just kind of having a misconstrued false idea of what their symptom actually is. And it is, you're not likely to get help if you're convinced that getting help isn't going to help you, versus maybe you're just a little bit bummed out and you'd rather probably hear that. Maybe I'm not depressed. If my symptoms, all of them, don't match this, then maybe there is hope for me, because as people who really have depression obviously don't want to feel depressed their entire lives. They need something to lift them up. So I know that if I were in this scenario, I'd rather have the hope of it's just me being sad so that I could go and do something about it, versus being convinced that I have depression and there's no hope for me. And not to convey the message, of course, because we're getting into a little bit of dangerous area, and not to advertise that there isn't hope if you have depression, but it's better for the people who aren't depressed to not think that it's worse than it actually is, and to motivate them to getting help. To be depressed and need help, it's an entirely different story. So for people who actually have depression, who are actually actively seeking help instead of wearing it like a badge of honor because really they don't have it, and for whatever reason people who have real depression are spending their time on the internet telling everybody about it and having fun and being #relatable instead of actually seeking help, because that's what real depressed people do. So basically, I saw a tweet, I think it was, or a screenshot of a conversation. It doesn't matter, because the facts, if they are still into it. And I'm going to be honest here, I didn't bother to fact check. I'm not going to do research, because I feel like it's one of those things where regardless if it's true or fake, it's where you kind of start having to bring attention to it, because usually, even if it is fake, fake stuff is based off of inevitability. When you make something fake, the way that you make it sound believable or real is by kind of relating it to real life things, so that people can be convinced on that. So even if it is fake, it's probably not. It doesn't matter, because it's something that should still be brought attention to. So I'm not going to show the whole thing, not because I'm taking context away from it, but it's really just kind of a disgusting topic. But for the parts that I am showing, that's where it is important to see it. And so it talks about the president. Oh my God, I hate Trump. It talks about the president taking away funding from suicide prevention and mental health cares. And he's taking away $500 million. And I feel like that's kind of very serious. And it's one of those things where people have the power to do this, and it's already done. Basically, the way that you have to look at it, and why you could kind of understand why it happened, is because if I were someone who knew that $500 million and more was going into funding for depression, suicide prevention, and mental health, but I saw all these kids go, I'm depressed, I have suicide, I'm so cool because I have mental health, I wouldn't really take it seriously either. And I wouldn't want $500 million that could be used for so many other things to go into something that's kind of a trendy, angsty thing. It only makes sense. It's not taken seriously. People who actually have depression, who suffer from lack of eating, lack of motivation, and lack of wanting to live, are spending their time on the internet kind of wearing it like a badge of honor. I probably wouldn't want to give funding either. So yes, and that's why I feel like it has to be taken seriously. It's a lot harder if you have depression, because when things like this happen, whether or not it's true, and 500 million did get taken away, or whether or not it's false, it's when it's not taken seriously, how can you address it? If someone comes to me and they're like, yes, I have depression, and I go, oh wait, isn't depression that cool angsty trend that's going on? I probably wouldn't give 100% effort in trying to help this person, because in my mind, when they're not really actively seeking help, they're just trying to add another thing to the list. It's kind of like when a lot of people make false rape allegations, and we start inventing this thing called rape culture, where we start getting people to believe that for whatever reason it's okay to rape people because that's what we think as a society, and it becomes harder for people who have actually been raped to want to come out, because we just fear monger them into thinking that shit that doesn't exist exists. It's kind of like the same thing when people feel like they want to die and they feel like there's no hope, and then we show them, yes, there's hope, because people make it look like a joke all the time. You probably wouldn't want to come out. I just feel like for people who are kind of going through the symptoms, and you take it upon yourself to where you actually don't know what you're feeling and you're not sure and you are a little bit sad. It's not something you talk about because you maybe feel like no one cares or you're not important enough. I do hope in some point, although it is a little bit of a joke, that a lot of this information helped you, what the difference is and what you might actually have, how you can actively seek help, whether or not it is because you're sad or you have depression. Just know that, for example, I don't know his name, but you could look up the story. The guy who jumped off of the Golden Gate Bridge, I think it was, to commit suicide. He didn't end up dying, and he was saying that as soon as he jumped, he ended up regretting it. And there's just a lot of stories and a lot more scenarios in which people are thankful that they got help instead of the tragedies that we bring attention to so often nowadays. It is possible to get help, and I do hope you actively seek that.